Hey there, everybody. We are here at the Magical Solution with me, Lailani, on This Is How We Grow. I am so excited to be back. I took a trip to India. I was gone for a whole month. I'm really excited to share that story with you guys in the near future. But tonight, we are kicking off the first episode in our new season of This Is How We Grow. And I'm really excited to bring our guest in. He is an author. His name is David Pantano. He authored The Hermetic Physician, The Magical Teachings of Giuliano Kremmerz, and the Fraternity of MYRIAM. Now, David Pantano is an independent researcher, translator, historian, and writer specializing in spirituality, metaphysics, philosophy, and the initiatic practices of both the West and the East. Now, I'm really excited to bring him on tonight because a subject on Hermeticism, Fraternity of MYRIAM, and of course, this special name here that we're going to know more about tonight is something that I haven't heard of online. And so I'm really excited to bring him on and to answer your questions tonight as well. So let's do it. We did it. Hey, David.
Awesome. Good to see you, Lailani.
We are on. We are on. Thank you so much for stopping by and for being a guest on my show tonight.
Yes, don't you love technology?
Yeah.
And it's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to this interview and an opportunity to field any questions from the exalted audience that we have listening and watching. So,
Yes. And for those of you who are with us tonight, make sure you drop your questions in the comments section. And for those who are watching on the replay, by all means, at the end of this live, we will be sending out information for contact and ways that you can purchase David's book and ways that you can reach out to him. So I highly suggest that you do that. So, David, this book, The Hermetic Physician.
yes.
So I got through it. I am not a smart person, to say the least. So for me, it was information that I had to really take time to digest. And I know my audience isn't familiar with a lot of this lingo here. So I want to make this story that you have here accessible to my peeps. And so my first question to you is, what is Hermeticism? And I know that's a loaded question because it's a very big esoteric system, but specifically, Hermeticism from where it started to basically the point in which you decided to write this book about this particular person in Italy. So like, where did that bridge? How did it go from where it started to what we're seeing here with this particular practitioner?
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that. And that's quite a time capsule to be able to cover, but we're about doing the impossible here. So
Yeah.
yeah, so Hermeticism starts in ancient Egypt, in really the pre-dynasty Egypt. It was associated with the sage. Some called him a king or a pharaoh. Some called him even a god. His name was Thoth, and he's associated with a divine intelligence. So it's not the mundane intelligence of empirical information, but the intelligence that bridges the gap between the divine and the three-dimensional world that most of us live in. And so Hermes was the Greek equivalent, and when Greece, through Alexandria, the establishment of colonies in Egypt, sort of merged the cultures, the name Hermeticism took on from the original teachings that were part of the Egyptian um, uh, doctrines of theology and kingship and sacred information.
Mm.
And so the term Hermeticism came from that, is those teachings associated with Hermes or Thoth. Now, whether there was an actual real person named Thoth or Hermes, I think that's secondary to the wealth, the magisterium of information, both the doctrines and practices associated with Hermeticism. And I could just take a few moments to summarize some of those key principles. And
Please.
it's actually summarized quite well in a document called the Emerald Tablet that some of the readers and some of the viewers may be familiar with. And basically, it talks about a system of oneness where every individual, every entity in the universe is connected through the
Mm,
one. So sort of like the number system where we have all the numbers line up into infinity, but they're all divisible by the one.
mm,
So Hermeticism speaks of a non-duality. So there's a union between every one of us, and that unity is realized at a transcendent state. So as one is able to enter into subtle aspects of themselves, which we call the spirit, one's able to connect to that sense of oneness and experience a heightened sense of knowledge and of freedom associated with transcending the physical plane. Another aspect is that the manifest is the phenomena is a manifest of unmanifested principles. So there's what we see on the surface is really the product of what's going on in the inside, and the inside is
mm,
unmanifested. It's of a spiritual or of a transcendent nature. So those are some of the key principles that underline Hermeticism, in that they different than some of the other religious beliefs that talk about a fall of man into this mundane state. That Hermeticism teaches that each individual has a divine core, and
yes.
through various practices, through various rituals and observations, that one is able to realize that sense of divineness within. And that's really the core practices of Hermeticism, is the ability to transcend the human without losing the human or without losing the mundane, to be able to have a fuller and more holistic experience of of the universe, of oneself. And so that's the basis of Hermeticism, and it was codified in a number of works and manuscripts in ancient Egyptian writings, in the papyrus, and in Greek as well, and in the Mediterranean world, I guess through all the turbulations that have occurred over time, that those works, those manuscripts that were attributed to Hermes, and he's also known as in Greek as Trismegistus, the thrice grace. Is so someone who's great not only in the physical but in the mental and the spiritual as well, is another attribute of unifying the three realms that most individuals are able to experience: the physical, what we perceive with our external senses; the mental or the intelligent, where we're able to imagine, what we're able to calculate using our intelligence; and the spiritual is that sense of experiencing inside of us a greater dimension of being than what we can see on the outside. So those manuscripts, those sacred writings associated with Thoth, or as the Greeks called it, Hermes, the Romans called it Mercury, was lost through the various
Mm,
invasions and wars that occurred in the Mediterranean. It was lost in Europe, but in to be fair, there were still texts available in the Muslim part of the Middle East, such as in Syria and Iran and even in ancient Turkey. But they were rediscovered by an Italian monk around the 1460s, and he brought it to Florence. And there was a patron named Lorenzo de' Medici, who was known for patronizing the arts, Leonardo, Michelangelo. And he had one of his top scholars named Marsilio Ficino to translate these works, these manuscripts that were written in ancient Greek, in hieratic
uh-huh.
Greek, into Latin. And
Okay.
these 15 books were called the Corpus Hermeticum. And they're basically written in dialogues between Hermes, the god, and various learned disciples, such as Asclepius, And it's basically the disciple saying, I would like to learn the reality of life, to know more than just what my eyes are able to see.
Mm.
And Hermes in this dialogue forms, then I will teach you, but you will have to go through various stages of purification, because these teachings are of a transcendent type that the average human is not able to understand them, because he's tied down to earthly and mundane ways of seeing and perceiving things. So
Yes.
we're talking about at this point about in the mid 1400s that the books became translated into a language that was common to Europeans at that time, and from there it really caught on fire, because it really opened up uh, the possibilities of how people saw themselves, of individuals, that they were previously just taught one way to look at themselves, that there was this older and in some ways more enriched um, doctrine and philosophy and practice that could help them to transcend themselves and understand the ways of the world that previously wasn't available to them. And
Mm.
that was the basis of Hermeticism. From there, it really spread, and it caught on with philosophers. Newton was very much involved in Hermeticism, in various artists such as of the Renaissance and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then we come to the modern times of the last century, of the 1900s, that these hermetic practices really took shape, or grounded, rooted in some of the secret societies, such as Freemasonry, and alchemical circles. And in the late 1880s, there was this a novice named Giuliano Kremmerz, which is really a pseudonym. His real name was, or his biographical name was Ciro Formizano, who was born just outside of Naples,
Mm.
and he was born into a very common family of modest means. But in their house was a hermit named Izar, who was an initiate in the Hermetic circle that was associated with a circle that was outside of Naples, that was associated with a temple of Isis, that Egyptian immigrants had migrated during classical times, in which
Mm.
the eruption of the Vesuvius, of the mountain, had covered. And through the excavations, there were manuscripts found that were attributed to this temple of Isis. And from it
Wow.
developed a circle of initiates that practiced an Isis, or a lunar type of Hermeticism, that formed the egregore, or the um, the aura associated with this Hermetic circle that this novice named Giuliano Kremmerz was initiated in. And at that time, in the 1880s, in Naples and in much of the world, there was a cholera epidemic.
Mm.
And Kremers thought it would, in his development, it would be fortuitous to be able to apply these hermetic practices of transferring energy, of purification, and channeling that purified energies to those who are afflicted,
Mm.
or those who are suffering, to ease their suffering, and in some cases to assist in their healing. So that was the genesis,
Wow.
basically, of the idea of starting this fraternity of Miriam. Was based, much like the times we're coming out of, where there was an epidemic ravaging the world, where people are feeling hopeless, and that Kremertz and other initiates of this circle associated with this ancient temple of Isis at the base of the Mount Vesuvius, was to tap into some of these healing practices that was associated with ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, to heal individuals in various practices associated with the hermetic healing and therapeutics. So that, in a nutshell,
Wow.
kind of brings us from
Yeah.
pre prehistoric Egyptian times, pre 2000, to the early 1900s, where Kremmerz founded this circle, this hermetic chain called the Fraternity of Miriam, to practice this therapeutic healing or energy transference with a bunch of like-minded individuals who would go through this ascetic type of ritual practice to be able to purify themselves, to tap into the some of the inherent powers that we all have that are latent because we're not aware of them, but
Right.
being initiated into these practices, that one is able to tap into and actual channel some of these energies,
Mm.
both at an individual and a collective state.
Amazing, amazing. You know, it's interesting because when you think about a lot of ancient cultures, uh, uh, there's this pretty cohesive idea that, you know, there is a core to us that is connected to divine or is divine in and of itself, and that there's something about being here on earth, there's something about being in this body that requires a sort of elevation and or purification in order to really tune in and connect with that divine spark or that divine source that's in us. And you see this sort of narrative being played out all over the world with civilizations that are supposedly never encountered each other. And so I find that fascinating. So that by the time it gets to, you know, Europe and specifically, you know, Italy, what we're talking about, it's just it's so fitting because you see again sort of a repeat of a narrative where there's an influx of immigration and immigrants coming in, they're bringing in their ideas, their spirituality, their thoughts, and then when they arrive, there's a lot of turmoil happening, whether it's medical issues or political issues or famine or whatever. It's sometimes all of it. um and there's almost like this rebirth or this new breath of fresh air with regards to these new ideas that have been immigrated in and the current standing ideas that are happening in that space. You know, this melting pot occurs and you start to see these different things pop up, and I feel like what you saw and what you researched there that happened right in Tuscany and Naples is happening,
Yeah.
like you said, here. It's happening now. We have the same sort of influx of immigration, political upheaval, climate change, pandemics. There's all kinds of stuff happening. And yet there's so many booming spiritual practices that are popping up out of everywhere. And people's thoughts are being mixed together. But there's still this sort of foundation, and you start to see a lot of like these self-help books and like these healing practices popping up, but there's a nugget of truth that kind of stems all the way back to that original thought of there's something within us that is greater than us, and the shell that we're in somehow needs to be purified in order for us to get to that thing. And how can we do that together? How can we help each other do that? So this hermetic healing practice that Giuliano came about, can you kind of expand on that? Like, what does that look like? What are some of the core principles of this hermetic healing practice?
Surely, Lonnie, and that was a very nice soliloquy. I can't really add to that. It's very well articulated. I would just say though, all these practices that you refer to tie back to a universal archetype.
Yes.
Whether it's Isis, Mary, Nostra Senora de la Guadalupe, it all ties back to a universal archetype. and
Yeah.
and this is where the one comes in, and the ability of these healing practices to be able to transcend the individual, to connect to something greater than this small self that gets caught up to the nine to five world. And
Yes.
tapping into this universal archetype was the key component of the Miriam. So the Miriam refers to the Maria, refers to the Miriam of Hebraic tradition. It refers to that universal feminine archetype. It's that
Mm,
divine. It's that mother that gives birth to the divine, and
mm,
that's the. It's. it's that level of solace, that level of healing that we all is the basis of civilization. As the
Yeah.
societies where there's a strong female component, of loving component, that we're able to break down the conflicts and see beyond our egoistic limits.
Yes.
So that was part of that. It was introducing, fusing that archetype of the divine feminine, of the matronal feminine into the healing practice was the key, I guess, symbol of the healing practice. And so,
Mhm.
how does that play out in the real world? So in the using hermetic practices as a means um, uh, to transcend the individual is through a process of purification, and purification not only in a physical level of being clean and watching what you eat, but also at the four levels of the human, at the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual.
Yes.
And from that, one is able, using an alchemical framework, to transcend from the black work, or the work where we have to come into contact with our shadow, with our vices, with our the components that limit us. Is that not that we want to repress it, we want to acknowledge it and deal with it. So when the Miriam would there was a series of practices that are connected using the Hermetic doctrines of various celestial configurations, specifically with the lunar configurations. So some of the practices would involve on the new moon to do fasting, and to do some specific rituals to
Mhm.
cleanse out the subconscious, the emotional conscious, which is a lot of what the angers get repressed or get sublimated in the subconscious.
Mm.
So to be able to reach to that state of purity where one is able to glow, one's aura is able to vibrate with this energy that's pure and pristine, that hasn't been contaminated with the physical and the social and the mundane world, is where the therapeute, as an initiate, wants to arrive at, to be able to uh, project this energy through their practices into a collective reservoir where it could be tapped in by masters to be able to project to individuals who are afflicted with various types of illnesses that have come to the Miriam to look to relieve their suffering, or even just to get solace. So there was a whole process of having a master therapist to do the proper assessment, and then to consult with the various books and manuscripts to do, to come up with the appropriate um, therapeutic intervention, using the chain of Miriam, using this purified reservoir of healing energy, to be able
Mhm.
to make that connection, sort of like a pairing between tapping into the afflicted individual's energetic or vibrational current,
Mhm.
understanding their karmic imprint, and
Yes.
doing the proper assessment to determine what is the appropriate energy input that would lead to a homeostasis, or lead to a balancing, or a configuration of one's energetic physical balance. Um,
Yes.
so that was some of the basic principles, the therapeutic principles associated with this fraternity of Miriam.
See, what I love about what you just explained, right? So like when we think about a lot of the Abrahamic monotheistic religions, right? We see the same idea of spirit and flesh, but the way that it is described is that flesh is a problem that needs to be eradicated so that we can be spiritual and be connected to spirit. But from what I'm seeing here, and this again is seems to be a narrative that I'm picking up across a lot of mystic and healing practices, which is it's that, when we talk about healing, we're not talking about curing a person. We're talking about, like you said, bringing someone back into homeostasis, whatever that balance is for
Yeah.
them and for their energetic imprint. It's to kind of realign them to that. And I
Yeah.
feel, that really incorporates a lot of science. It involves a lot of understanding of medicine as well. It isn't just about prayers and things like that. And you, like you had mentioned, Hermeticism also, it incorporated sort of like that alchemical vibe too. And many scientists were Hermeticists. So this wasn't just these abstract, ritualistic ideas. These were very much rooted in how the body works and how to sort of manipulate those energies. When you were talking about the healing well of the MYRIAM, um brings me to another point too. It's this idea that, because whenever you think about the occult, right, whenever you think about um Hermeticism and, like, Aleister Crowley and all these other different sort of occult ideas, you think of like this solitary, person with like a black cape on, with his big grimoire in front of him, making all these
Yeah.
incantations to demons and whatnot. But what I'm seeing here, and what I'm seeing with a lot of these mystical healing practices, is that yes, it is a solitary practice in which you are elevating and purifying yourself to connect with spirit, but it's also a group practice, because that healing pool of Miriam wasn't just like, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It was from all the members of that particular group sort of focusing in on this and pouring in that energy into the well. Am I getting that correctly?
Yeah, again, bang on with your descriptions,
Okay.
and you are right. There, Kremmerz said there is no separation between body and spirit. It's all one. It's just a different vibrational frequency. That
Right.
it's all connected. So to the and Kremer said that the Miriam, this hermetic healing wasn't meant to act as a standalone. It's meant to complement conventional treatments. They go into it a different angle. Instead of the conventional medicine treats you from the body, from the physical, whereas Hermeticism works the other way around, from the inside out. And it's not
Mm,
meant as a standalone, but to complement. So the understanding is if the physical doctors or if the conventional doctors are working from the physical inwards and Hermetis is working for the inside out, there's a there's a the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. There's a
yes.
holistic component,
Yeah.
and the information, the treatments were all documented. So it was scientific and empirical based. It didn't always work, but Kramer said there is no panacea. There is no solution, even in conventional medicine, that's going to work 100% of the time.
Right.
Sometimes an individual's life cycle is so far gone that there's nothing that you can retrace the natural real the natural determination that cycle is gonna end itself, and that
Right.
one needs to respect that. And if there are certain signs in terms of the treatment that indicated that signs of Saturn and signs of the death was imminent, then it wasn't in the best interest to continue. It was it was to change the focus to provide solace to the individual and their families in the last hours or days that they had left. So it was very much a practice that was based on empirical and scientific methods, and not on faith alone. It was based on energy, and based on that harmonic conversions of energy that could be channeled from this fraternity of well wishers, of ascetics, of those practicing a sense of purity greater than what's known in the common world. And to
Yeah.
be able to mix that, to pair that with individuals whose, let's face it, when we're sick, our energy is drained. We're at a deficiency of energy, and what the Miriam tried to do is to replace that deficient energy with strong, vibrant life force, healing energy, to be able to arrive at that homeostasis, so the individual could start to cure themselves and heal themselves. So in many ways, the Miriam was the impetus, was the trigger for one's own self healing. And the other part you mentioned about the cult, and yeah, there's this whole stereotype. The Miriam wasn't connected to Crowley or any of those types, but it's the Hermetic individual is typically in society always been the one ahead of the times. Has always been the one is not in the norm. Is antinomian in the sense that he deals more with the extraordinary than the ordinary.
Yeah.
If you're looking for, the central tendency, when you do your bell curve, that's not where you find the hermeticists. The hermeticists is at the outliers, and that's where they really belong, is that they're ones that experiment. They're the ones that their quality of being is a different level than how most people or science is at a current point, which doesn't mean they're antagonists. It just means to be that they're focusing on areas that common science and common practices don't focus on. So the combination of the two can, in many cases, provide a greater rich or greater scope of healing potential for those who really need it.
Nice. I want to get back to some of the hermetic healing methods, but I wanted to rewind really quickly because when you were talking about the fraternity of Miriam, and you were describing who Miriam is or what this archetype is, and you mentioned the divine feminine. So there's this big sort of movement happening now in on the internet sphere about decolonizing our spiritual practices and sort of rescuing it from the Abrahamic dualistic world of religion, where these ideas of ultimate divine feminine, ultimate masculine energy are harmful ideologies in our spiritual practices. But I still beg to differ, and maybe I'm old school with it, because I don't see this. We're not talking about biological sex here. There are these energies in which the pendulum swings and passes through all of them, and all of them are within all the other ones. So there's no real separation. But when we talk about divine feminine here, with regards to the hermetic healing and with regards to the fraternity of Miriam, the way you were describing her or describing the archetype, it almost feels it, it almost kind of informs this idea of um divine love and like emotions.
Yeah.
This sort of, I'm wondering, basically my question is, I'm wondering if hermetic healing is something to sort of help us to align our emotions, because the emotional factor in spiritual practices is really where like that power comes from what I'm seeing. And usually the divine feminine is the one that's in charge, if you will, or is the archetype of emotions, if you will. Can you comment on that? Is that something that hermetic healing does kind of touch on?
It touches on very much for the reasons you mentioned. And let me just take a moment to try and explain that the best I can. So you're right. When we talk about the divine feminine, we're talking about this matronal or matriarchal component. We're not talking strictly in biological terms. That the initiate, who's truly able to transcend their physical limitations, takes on aspects both of the feminine and the masculine. It's called in hermetical practice the rebis, and then there's many drawings that shows the initiate is on the one side having physical characteristics of a woman, and the other side, typically the right side, those characteristics of a man.
Mm,
So what that implies is that at this transcendent state, that regardless of your biological determination, you're able to tap into those feminine qualities or feminine attributes that are necessity for the healing, for the giving birth of that divine child, regardless
mhm,
whether in the physical world you're male or female. And this is not a plasticity of psyches in terms of male female. It's basically we all have attributes just in the physical sense, and more, that we have a predominance of one or the other. But when we're doing this transcendence for hermetic healing, it's to arrive at that sense of purity where you transcend your gender determination. You take on qualities that are attributable to both, without a man being feminine and a feminine being man. That's not like that. It's not played out in those political terms as it is in some modern society. It's just meant that when you transcend, doing inside of yourself, you transcend. It's like sort of like when you're in a dream state. You don't dream that you are male or female. You're just this conscious light, and light
Yes.
in itself has both those qualities. So I just wanted to touch on that.
Non-binary, non-binary for
Non-binary,
spiritual.
exactly, yeah. Um, and again, without implying that there's some sort of gender bender going on. That's not. It's not
Right,
that. It's not that at all.
right.
In terms of the practice itself, it's its ability to be able to harness this energy, this repository of energy, that is channeled through the emotional channel. And the emotions are that spiritual part of the self that's most physical, and the physical part of the self that's most spiritual, in the sense that the
Yes.
energy that flows through our nervous system is comes from the transcendent area, but yet the nerves are the very subtlest component of our physicality. So to be able to make that link between the physical and the spiritual is that we root it through these emotional centers that we call the lunar body, and the lunar body is typically a feminine body, in symbolic terms. Hello, hello.
Did I lose ya?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay,
You
great.
can't hear me no more?
I can hear you, but your image is froze. But
Oh,
okay,
sheesh. But I don't know, hopefully you can hear me now,
I
but
can. Yes, yeah,
I'm so lucky being able to do these kinds of interviews because you know brilliant minds like yourself are able to shed light on subjects that many of us, and I'm pretty sure my audience can agree too, of having these moments of like, you intuitively know a lot of this information is so resonating with the soul. So when you hear someone who's done the research or written the books speak on it, and they speak the words that your soul has been telling you for so long, it's a wonderful validating feeling. And so I'm really hoping that people are listening right now and going, yes, I knew that, I felt that, because I know I'm having those moments as you speak, and it feels really
yeah.
really great.
Well, you touch on a good point that a lot of these disciplines, these concepts we're talking about, we know intuitively, but in many cases they haven't been articulated into words. So
Right.
we know, we go by someone, or we have a conversation with someone, and you hit it off right away, and you wonder what you wonder what is it about it. That's that lunar connection. So their aura is vibrating at such a subtle level that it's infiltrating your aura. So it transcends your cognitive ability to make sense of it, because there really isn't a word or vocabulary to express that. But we're drinking all of this beautiful energy, this soothing energy, and it's elating us. We're feeling a lightness. And sometimes when you're with these people who are of an exalted nature, there's almost this perfume of rose or lavender, or there's
Yes.
this lightness of being that raises your emotional state from where it was to something that's freer, that's something that is more subtle and more elastic and more ethereal, and
Yes.
and and a lot of times we don't have words to express that because our vocabulary, and when I say our vocabulary, the general vocabulary is very poor for these type of things. But that's what we're talking about, making that lunar connection between our emotional bodies, this whole vibrational frequency, to raise it up to a level where there are synergies, where there are convergences, and where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And yet we have difficulty
Yes.
expressing it in words because the words are too impoverished, but the feelings, these exalted feelings are real, and we need to acknowledge them for our own development so we can encourage a society. What we bring in we can put out.
Yes. Now speaking of, making these emotional connections and not having words to it, can we make those wordless emotional connections through sex? Is that
Oh,
still a way
definitely
to
so.
heal?
Definitely so. So Eros, as Kremmerz says, is the greatest magical force in the universe. And Eros works on two primary forces. Those are
Eros the god?
sympathies.
The Cupid guy?
Eros. I mean, when I say Eros, I mean the force of sex is Eros.
Aha.
So, in a generic term, so regardless of your cultural or philosophical or moral background or perspective, one should acknowledge that sex is a force. There's an
Yes.
energy behind it that's very strong. So, if you want to call it whatever you want to call it, I'll choose to call it eros, and then I'm referring to the force of sex and not to any moralistic philosophy or perspective of sex. But looking at eros as a force or sex as a force, Kremer says it's the strongest force in the universe, and it resides on two principles: those of sympathy and those of antipathy. Sympathy is bringing things together. So whether it's gravity, whether it's a moon orbiting around Jupiter, there's a sympathy going on, or whether there's one of antipathy, of of pushing people away. And those are the
Mm,
essence. So the strength that we have in terms of sex is the ability to unite. There's
yes.
ability of a fusion of energy, of physical, of heartbeats, of breath, of panting, that whole drama that
Yes.
occurs,
Yeah.
that we anthropologize in a human setting, but it really is a universal configuration of whether of neutrons and electrons coming together to form an atom. That is a form of sex. That's a form of union,
Yeah.
of working with sympathy. And it's all about energies, is the laws of attraction. You bring things together or you push them apart.
Yes.
And
It's
understanding
definitely that ebb and flow of Hermeticism.
and that's what causes a vibrational energy, is the
Yeah.
positive and the negative. It's the light and the the it's the day and the night, and
Yeah.
it's not putting a moral component into what's good and bad. It's understanding how to use them, understanding how they work and how to use them, that one can go behind the phenomena to deal with the unmanifested principles and how to apply them to get the results in the physical world, which is the basis of magic.
Yes. And speaking of that, so, when you were talking about the is it sympathy and anti-sympathy? Is that what you were saying it
Yeah,
was?
yeah,
Okay.
antipathies,
So
yeah.
when you were describing that, it kind of reminded me of sort of that ebb and flow of Hermeticism where like almost like magnetism, when two souths face each other, they repel, but when north and
Exactly.
south
It's
get
we're talking
together.
about polar magnetism.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it could be between people of the same sex. It could be different sex, that
Yeah.
you're attracted to certain people that and others you're not. Attracted to certain pets and others you're not. There and a lot of
Yeah.
that attraction occurs at a subtler level than what your mind can comprehend, or your even
Yeah.
how you perceive. It occurs through those phenoms, through those vibrational frequencies, that aura, that are meeting, and and they're determining whether there's a convergence, there's a fusion, or whether there's not. And that's okay. I mean, it's okay.
Mm.
It doesn't mean we can't be social or anything like that. It just means
Right.
that we're not
But
meant
there's
as
something
individuals.
right.
Sorry.
No, no, no. And there's something to be said about that intimacy, that connection that you're talking about.
Yeah, and
So
it
it's
also
okay to
talks
not have
about
that.
plurality, that we're not all meant to be the same. That
Right.
it's okay to have diversity, and
Yes.
in the greater good, it all balances each other. So we can't have all solar peoples. We need lunar people. We can't have all Venusian people from Venus. We need some Mars as well. We
Yes.
need jocks as well as we need lovers. We need artists like we need politicians, and well, maybe not politicians, but you know the point I mean. So it,
Yeah.
it just means to say that there's at a threshold that transcends normal cognitive ability to make sense. There is a meshing of whether forces or currents of energy are able to mesh and fuse, or whether it doesn't not. And it
Yes.
doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's just that's how the universe works
That's it.
through polar
Exactly.
magnetisms.
And all of the
And the
effects of those
Miriam uses
interactions.
those. The Miriam uses those in its diagnosis to understand the the karmic source of illnesses, because illnesses
Yeah.
is an unbalance of a normal state, and there's usually some cause that precipitates what that phenomena. As I mentioned in the opening sequence in the Hermetic principles, is that the manifest is a result of the unmanifest, and it's
Mm.
understanding what those energetic causes are would better help to go at a deeper level to find out how we can balance or root out some of the imbalances to arrive at that homeostasis.
Ugh. You guys, the Hermetic physician, okay? The Magical Teachings of Giuliano Kremmerz and the Fraternity of Miriam. Make sure you get your hands on this book. It is every page has something amazing on it that you need to know, okay? Now, David, talk to us a little bit about any upcoming projects you're working on, ways people can reach you. Just tell us what's going on with
For
you.
sure. Yeah. No, I look forward to what I really treasure, Leilani, is having a direct relationship with the readers. So,
Yes.
by all means, if this information, if this type of knowledge, if this type of teaching and practices is of interest of you, reach out to me through Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, David Pantano. Send me a note. Tell me where you heard about me, or where you came across this information, so we can start a conversation and we can expand this level of knowledge. Because Kremers and the Miriam is not very well known in the English part of the world, except for those who are really in the know in terms of Hermeticism. But that's a small few. We believe this information can change consciousness, like it did in Renaissance Florence. It really opened up the new perspective, the scope of man's potential, the dignity of man. That we're not just as fallen creatures, that we're basically sheep that are at the mercy of various forces, that we are co-creators to make a better world, and just understanding the underlying principles and how to apply it to transcend our selfishness, to a much greater vision of what it means to be human and what it means to be alive in this beautiful universe with lovely hosts like Leilani to to be the harbingers of light.
Listen, man, you opened up a floodgate with this book, and I'm so glad you did. I hope everyone gets an opportunity to read it because you're 1,000% right. This idea, this concept of healing in from this perspective, I think is so needed right now, and an usherance of a new sort of renaissance, a resurgence of spiritual healing is well past due here in America. So I hope I pray and I just hope that this book definitely does that, and I believe it will. I really do. I believe in what you wrote here. I think this was a you're a great author, great researcher, and I look forward to having you back on the show
For
too.
sure, would love that. Would love that. Great.
All right, guys. I hope that everyone has a wonderful Sunday. Let's give a few shout outs to a few people that showed up to the live tonight: Sonia, Steven, Robert. Anyone who is in the chat right now, say hello, tell us where you are, and thank you so much for coming tonight. And for those who are watching on the replay, thank you so much for watching wherever you are and whenever you are. David, once again, thank you so much on the show. And to all the viewers, this is how we grow. This is how we grow. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Cheers.
Yay!